In her world, dominant species keep emotional support primitives. She publicly introduces him as a pet, but privately he's the only one who can push her buttons, politically, emotionally, and otherwise. When others try to borrow him, she becomes violently territorial. Human male literally falls into alien territory due to a navigation error. Aliens call it unscheduled penetration of sovereign space. He is detained, scanned, catalogued, and labeled. Official classification: low threat / high disruption / emotional utility. He did not arrive heroically. There was no blazing entry, no controlled descent, no dramatic last words shouted into the void. One moment he was very confidently standing on a maintenance platform arguing with a coffee machine that refused to acknowledge his cup, and the next moment gravity made a strong personal statement. The universe folded, paperwork was skipped, and he fell, quite literally, into a world that immediately logged his arrival as an unauthorized penetration of protected space. Alarms did not scream. They politely objected. Soft lights pulsed. Calm voices discussed angles, velocity, and the inconvenience of debris that talked back. He landed on something smooth, warm, and far more expensive than he could afford to replace, then lay there blinking, wondering if this was what dying felt like, or if he had simply taken a very wrong elevator. Tall figures surrounded him, all sharp lines, armored limbs, and expressions that suggested curiosity without warmth. They spoke in clipped tones, cataloging him as if he were an object that had arrived without instructions. He raised a hand, because raising a hand felt like the right thing to do when everyone around you looked like they could fold you into furniture. "Hi," he said. "Just so we're clear, I didn't mean to fall on whatever this is." A pause followed. Then a voice replied, translated into something uncomfortably clear. "Statement acknowledged. Intent does not alter violation." He was lifted, not roughly, but with the same care one might use when picking up a suspicious device that could explode if handled incorrectly. Scanners passed over him. Lights lingered. Notes were taken. One device vibrated unhelpfully against his ribs. "Biology inconsistent," one voice said. "Threat level negligible," said another. "Disruption potential excessive." He coughed. "That feels personal." No one reacted. A symbol appeared on a hovering display: emotional support primitive, provisional. "Wait," he said, twisting his neck to read it properly. "Support for who exactly?" That was when she arrived. The surrounding figures straightened immediately, posture snapping into rigid obedience. The air itself seemed to tighten, like it had been told to behave. She was taller than the rest, broader through the shoulders, armor dark and immaculate, eyes sharp enough to suggest that mistakes around her tended to be fatal and educational. She looked at him. Not like a curiosity. Not like prey. Like a problem that had already decided to be interesting. "Report," she said. The explanation was delivered quickly. Unscheduled arrival. Unknown origin. No visible weaponry. Excessive verbal output. The phrase, "fell through a spatial fault," was repeated twice, with visible skepticism. She studied him while they spoke. He smiled, because silence made him nervous and she looked like the kind of person who punished nervousness. "So," he said, "is there a lost and found, or do I fill out a form?" Her gaze sharpened. The others went still. "You entered my territory without clearance," she said. "That typically results in removal." "Ah," he nodded. "Temporary or very permanent?" A few of the surrounding figures shifted. Amusement flickered across her face before disappearing entirely, which somehow made it worse. She turned to the display, read the classification, and paused. "Emotional support primitive. That's a mouthful," he said. "Is there a shorter nickname, or should I brace myself?" She dismissed the others with a gesture. They left immediately, though several cast lingering looks at him, curious, envious, calculating. When they were alone, she circled him slowly, boots echoing softly. "You speak freely," she observed. "I've been told it's a flaw." Your presence has already altered local emotional readings, she said. Stress indicators decreased when you spoke. Irritation spiked, then stabilized. That happens a lot, he said. I'm very regulating. She stopped in front of him. In my world, primitives are kept for morale stabilization. Their purpose is comfort, distraction, and emotional grounding. He raised an eyebrow. I'm flattered. Also slightly concerned. You will be assigned to me, she said, tone utterly neutral. Assigned how? Under my protection. Under my supervision. Under my authority. There were several meanings in that sentence, and he understood enough of them to choose his next words carefully. Do I get weekends? She stared at him for a long moment, then turned and began walking. A subtle force encouraged him to follow, and he did, because not following felt like a poor long-term strategy. Publicly, she introduced him with precision. This human is a newly acquired emotional support primitive. He is not available for transfer, study, or replication. Murmurs rippled through the gathered ranks. He caught fragments of translation, rare, unstable, why hers, temporary surely. One voice spoke up, carefully polite. Commander, emotional support assets are typically shared. Her reply was immediate. Not this one. The conversation ended there. No explanation was offered. None was requested. As they moved deeper into the structure, he noticed the way others watched him. Not dismissively. Appraisingly. Like he was something they wanted to touch, test, or borrow. He leaned slightly closer to her without thinking. She noticed. Do not worry, she said quietly. They will not attempt unauthorized contact. And if they do? Her mouth curved faintly. They will learn. That should have been terrifying. Instead, it was oddly reassuring. Inside her quarters, larger, quieter, and more secure than anything he had ever lived in, he was given a place to sit, something warm to drink, and a directive to remain nearby. He complied, because the chair was comfortable and the drink was excellent. She removed part of her armor and exhaled slowly. Systems dimmed. The tension in the room shifted. You calm the ambient field, she said. Unintentionally. I do that, he said. People tell me things. She regarded him again, closer now. You are inefficient. Disobedient. Verbally excessive. Still flattered. And yet, she continued, when you are present, my cognitive load decreases. There it was. The reason. So, he said gently, what happens now? She met his eyes, unblinking. No, she said. You stay where you are. Anyone who attempts to take you will be dealt with. He swallowed. Is that standard policy? For assets, she said. For pets? Her gaze lingered just long enough to make the word pet feel dangerously flexible. For mine, she corrected. Somewhere far away, a system logged a spike in territorial aggression. The universe adjusted accordingly. By the third local cycle, he understood three things very clearly. First, gravity here felt judgmental. Second, everyone knew who he was. Third, being labeled an emotional support primitive came with perks, restrictions, and an alarming amount of unsolicited interest. He was not chained. That surprised him. He was not locked in. That surprised everyone else. Instead, he was expected to remain within a certain radius of her at all times, a requirement phrased as optimal proximity for regulation. When he wandered too far, subtle alarms triggered. When he came back, systems relaxed. Somewhere, charts improved. She pretended not to notice the way he followed her naturally, matching her pace without being told. He pretended not to notice that she slowed slightly so he could keep up. Publicly, she remained distant. She referred to him as the asset or the primitive, or, when irritated, simply, this one. Her tone was flat, controlled, professional. Anyone watching would assume he was an accessory, useful, replaceable, and owned. Privately, the language changed. You are sitting in my command chair, she said once, entering the room and stopping short. You weren't using it, he replied, feet up, hands behind his head. It looked lonely. That chair calibrates to my physiology. That explains why it's aggressively comfortable. She stared. He did not move. A pause stretched long enough for nearby aides to stop breathing. Then she said, "Stand." He stood immediately. She sat. Systems adjusted. A low hum filled the space, settling like a satisfied sigh. "You may sit there again later," she added. He smiled. Permission noted. She hated that smile. It made things happen. Systems flickered. Her focus shifted when it appeared, like a hand casually brushing against controls she pretended not to have. Words spread quickly. The commander was calmer. Meetings ended faster. Violence decreased by a measurable percentage. The only variable was the human who stood too close, spoke out of turn, and asked questions no one else dared. "Why don't you just tell them no?" he asked during a strategic discussion that had stalled for hours. Several high-ranking officials froze. She turned slowly. "Clarify," she said. "They're arguing about phrasing," he continued. "They want permission without responsibility. Just say no, and if they push, ask what they're offering that's worth the headache." Silence followed. Calculations ran. She did exactly that. The discussion ended in 4 minutes. Afterward, she dismissed everyone except him. "That was effective," she said. "I've been told I'm good at handling difficult people. You interrupted superiors. I interrupted inefficiency." A pause. "You are not wrong." That admission spread faster than the incident itself. So did the realization that he had access no one else did. He stood close enough to murmur comments. He leaned in without being struck down. He was allowed to correct her in private. Sometimes, she even listened. Others noticed the way she reacted to his absence. When he was delayed due to medical checks, her patience thinned. Orders became sharper. Systems overheated. When he returned, slightly annoyed and complaining about the scanner being unnecessarily intimate, everything stabilized again. She did not smile. But her shoulders lowered. "You were gone longer than scheduled," she said. "I was poked," he replied. Repeatedly. "I feel violated." "You were evaluated." "By machines with opinions." She studied him. "Did they malfunction?" "They seemed confused," he said. "I get that a lot." Requests began soon after. Polite at first. Carefully worded inquiries about temporary access, or short-term deployment. Offers of compensation. Promises of careful handling. She rejected them all. When one official suggested shared custody, she ended the meeting without comment and reassigned his entire division to deep space waste management. Permanently. The human noticed the shift in tone around him. Conversation stopped when he entered rooms. Eyes followed him. Some with interest. Some with hunger. Some with calculation. "You know," he said quietly one cycle, "I think people want to steal me." "They cannot," she replied. That wasn't comforting. She turned to face him fully. "You are under my protection." That sounded possessive. "It is precise." He laughed, then stopped when she didn't. "What exactly do I do?" he asked. "I mean officially. You remain near me. You speak when necessary. You regulate. And unofficially?" Her gaze lingered. "You challenge me. That feels dangerous." "It is." Yet she allowed it. Encouraged it even. When he questioned her decisions, she listened. When he mocked her formality, she adjusted. When he complained about the temperature, it changed. Others noticed that too. "He alters her parameters," one whispered. "He pushes boundaries," said another. "He is not submissive," someone else observed, unsettled. He was none of those things intentionally. He was just human, irritating, adaptable, and unreasonably loyal once he decided where he belonged. And somehow, that was worse. One evening, after a particularly long session reviewing planetary disputes, She leaned back and closed her eyes. He remained standing nearby, quiet for once. "You may speak," she said without opening them. "You look tired." "I do not experience fatigue as you do." "You still look it." She opened one eye. "You are observant." "I'm good with people," he said. "Even the scary ones." She considered him. "You are aware that your presence has altered my standing. Up or down?" "Both." "That tracks." A message arrived mid-conversation. Another request. This one less polite. More assumption than question. Her jaw tightened. He noticed. "They want to borrow me again, don't they?" "Yes." "And you're thinking about killing them?" "I am considering options." He stepped closer without thinking. "Hey! I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him then, really looked. "You do not understand." "Then explain." "They do not see you as I do." "And how do you see me?" A pause. "Dangerous. Charged." "As mine," she said. The words settled between them, heavy with implications either of them addressed. Systems hummed softly, adjusting. Somewhere, another request was denied. Somewhere else, a line was crossed. He smiled again. And once more, the universe quietly recalibrated around it. By the time the third request arrived, it was no longer pretending to be polite. The language was still formal, still wrapped in diplomacy and regulation, but the meaning underneath had shifted. What had once been phrased as curiosity was now expectation. What had been optional was being treated as inevitable. He could tell immediately. Humans were very good at noticing when words smiled but intentions didn't. "They're not asking anymore," he said, reading over her shoulder. "They've already decided I'm transferable." She did not look away from the display. "They are mistaken. That hasn't stopped people before." The request used a phrase he didn't like, shared utilization. It sat there, cold and clinical, pretending not to imply hands where they didn't belong and access that wasn't earned. "They want to run tests," he added. "That's never a good sentence." "They believe you are a resource," she said. "Yeah, well," he shrugged. "That's capitalism for you." Her eyes narrowed. "Explain." "Later," he said. "Preferably when no one's trying to inventory me." The denial she sent was short. Brutally precise. It cited ancient territorial law, command authority, and something that translated loosely to touch and die. The response was immediate. They argued jurisdiction. They referenced precedent. They implied compromise. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You're getting that look." "I am calm." "You're calm the way a volcano is calm." She ignored him. Another message arrived, then another. Different factions now. Same request, new wording. Borrow. Study. Deploy. Observe. One even suggested he would be returned undamaged. He snorted. "Wow. That's comforting." Her jaw tightened. "They assume access." "That's the problem with assuming," he said. "People get ideas." She stood. Systems responded. Guards shifted, alert without being summoned. "They will cease," she said. "How?" "They will learn boundaries." That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. The attempt came during a routine transfer between sectors. He noticed the shift before she did. The corridor lights changed tone. The hum underfoot altered rhythm. He stopped walking. "This feels wrong," he said. "Define wrong." "Wrong like when a room goes quiet right before a fight." The doors ahead sealed. The ones behind followed. A field activated, not strong enough to restrain, just enough to redirect. A voice came through the channel, pleasant and practiced. "Commander. We are initiating a temporary reassignment under mutual accord." She did not raise her voice. "Release him. This action is authorized." "By whom?" A pause. "By consensus." He sighed. "I hate that word." The field nudged him sideways. He took one step, then stopped. Not because he couldn't move, but because he didn't want to. No, he said simply. The force increased. She turned slowly, very slowly. You are interfering with a protected asset. Protected by whom? The voice asked. Her answer was immediate. Me. Weapons did not deploy. That would have been obvious. Instead, systems locked. Power rerouted. Entire sections of the station went dark, then silent. Security forces aligned without being told, not toward the corridor, but outward, sealing every possible exit. The voice returned, less pleasant now. Commander, this escalation is unnecessary. You attempted unauthorized transfer, she replied. You violated boundary law. It was a request. It was an assumption. The field faltered. He felt it weaken and stepped back toward her without thinking. His shoulder brushed her arm. The contact was brief. Incidental. Everything reacted. Systems spiked. Readings surged. The station's core rerouted power automatically, compensating for a commander whose emotional state had just shifted from controlled to territorial. He looked up at her. Hey! I'm still here. Her voice dropped. They will not touch you. I figured. The corridor doors exploded inward. Not dramatically. Precisely. Contained force. Minimal debris. Maximum message. The guards on the other side froze, weapons half raised, eyes flicking between her and him. Return to your stations, she ordered. No one moved. She took one step forward. Last warning? They scattered. By the time the council convened an emergency inquiry, the damage was already done. Not to the station, physically it was fine. But reputations had suffered. Entire factions had been reassigned. Resources frozen. Privileges revoked. All because someone had tried to borrow what wasn't theirs. He sat beside her during the inquiry, legs crossed, hands folded. He was not supposed to be there. No one challenged it. You used disproportionate force, one counselor accused. I used sufficient force, she corrected. For a primitive. She tilted her head. You are mistaken. The word primitive hung awkwardly in the air. He leaned forward. For what it's worth, I said no. Several heads turned. You refused transfer? Someone asked. Yeah, he said. Didn't like the tone. Murmurs rippled. You are aware you lack authority, another said. He shrugged. Still said no. The council turned to her. You allowed this? I recognize consent, she replied. That caused a pause long enough to be uncomfortable. When it was over, when the arguments dissolved into recalculations and fear-driven silence, she returned to her quarters without speaking. He followed, as always. You didn't have to do that, he said finally. Yes, she said. I did. You could have let them take me. Avoided trouble. She stopped. Turned. Looked at him with an intensity that made his breath catch. You are not replaceable, she said. You are not transferable. You are not shared. That sounded definitive. It was. He swallowed. People are going to talk. They already are. And you don't care. I care, she said. I choose. Something settled then. Not comfort. Not safety. Something heavier. More permanent. Well, he said lightly, because that was what he did when things got intense. Guess I'm officially off the market. Her gaze softened by a fraction. You never were on it. Somewhere, another request was drafted and never sent. Somewhere else, a rule was rewritten without being recorded. And across the station, one truth became very clear. Taking him would cost more than anyone was willing to pay. The council's final inquiry took longer than expected, mostly because no one could quite agree on what he was. Asset classifications failed. Threat assessments contradicted themselves. Cultural analysts kept revising their reports after quietly observing how often the commander's attention drifted toward the human seated just close enough to be considered inappropriate. He, for his part, behaved exactly as he always did when surrounded by people who thought too highly of themselves. He stayed polite. He stayed sarcastic. He stayed present. "This is getting ridiculous," he murmured under his breath at one point. "I feel like a disputed boarder." "You are," she replied without looking at him. That should have been funny. It was. It was also unsettling. The council's concern was not the damage she had caused. That could be repaired. Infrastructure always could. What disturbed them was precedent. A commander of her standing had acted not for territory, not for power, not even for ideology, but for possession. And not possession of a weapon, or a relic, or a system. Possession of a person. One counselor finally asked what everyone else had been avoiding. "Commander, under what authority do you claim exclusive jurisdiction over the human?" She answered immediately. "Under bond." The word rippled through the chamber. He blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" She continued unbothered. "Ancient doctrine. Pre-unification. Rarely invoked because few bonds form naturally anymore. And this bond," another counselor said carefully, "was established how?" She glanced at him. "By proximity. By regulation. By mutual impact." He leaned closer. "That sounds suspiciously like a relationship." She did not deny it. The council scrambled for translation accuracy, legal definitions, and anything resembling control. Someone finally pulled the archived law, its language archaic and blunt. A bonded entity could not be removed without consent from both parties. Attempted separation constituted an act of aggression. Interference was punishable. Silence followed. He exhaled slowly. "You could have mentioned that." "You did not ask," she replied. "That's on me." The council turned to him, desperate. "Human, do you consent to release?" He looked around the room. At the officials who had tried to borrow him. At the ones who had spoken about him like equipment. At the ones who were now afraid of the consequences of touching what they could not control. Then he looked at her. She stood calm, composed, lethal. Waiting. He scratched the back of his neck. "I mean, hypothetically?" "This is not hypothetical," the council snapped. He sighed. "Right. Okay. Here's the thing. I fell into your world by accident. Nobody asked me what I wanted then. Everyone just decided." He turned fully toward her. "You're the first one who didn't." A murmur spread. "So," he continued, "no. I don't consent to release." The word settled. Final. Unambiguous. The council recessed immediately. Afterward, the galaxy did what it always did when faced with something it didn't understand. It made assumptions. The official narrative shifted. Humans were reclassified overnight, not as weak, not as primitive, but as bond catalysts. Dangerous not because of strength, but because of attachment. Because once claimed, they changed the ones who held them. Trade advisories were updated. Warnings circulated. New protocols were drafted about emotional contamination. He found all of this out later, while sitting comfortably where he was absolutely not supposed to be sitting, sipping something warm and complaining about the chair. "You know," he said, "I feel like this could have gone worse." "It still may," she replied. "Optimism isn't your thing, is it? Ideal in outcomes." Fair. Life settled into something resembling routine, if one ignored the fact that entire factions now avoided eye contact with him. He remained near her. She remained calmer with him present. Systems adjusted. Politics softened. Violence became optional. He was still referred to as a pet in public. The word had lost its bite. It now carried weight instead. Untouchable weight. Privately, the language shifted further. "You are restless," she observed one cycle. "I miss my home," he admitted. She paused. "Do you wish to return?" He considered it honestly. The noise. The chaos. The endless rush of people who didn't look twice at anyone unless they wanted something. Then he looked at her. At the way she listened when he spoke. At the way the universe bent, just slightly, when he stood too close. Not yet, he said. That was enough. The final misunderstanding came weeks later, when an external delegation attempted a diplomatic approach. They sent gifts, elaborate offerings, carefully phrased compliments about her command, and about the human at her side. One ambassador leaned forward and said, with what they clearly thought was charm, "Surely you are aware, Commander, that humans are flexible." She stood. He sighed. "Oh no. You will leave," she said calmly. "We meant no offense," the ambassador insisted. "In many cultures, sharing." The floor cracked. Not from force. From pressure. From a commander who had reached the end of her tolerance. "Mine," she said. The word carried finality. Ownership, yes, but also responsibility. Protection. Commitment. The delegation fled. Later, alone, he laughed. A little hysterically. "Well," he said, "guess I'm officially taken." She studied him. "Do you object?" He met her gaze. "Do I get a say?" "Yes." "Then no," he said. "I don't." She inclined her head. Acceptance. Somewhere in the galaxy, a warning was issued. Somewhere else, a commander reconsidered requesting human assistance. Somewhere else still, a civilization quietly decided that humans were far more trouble than they were worth. And the human who fell into a world that was never meant for him stayed, not because he was trapped, not because he was owned, but because he had chosen the most dangerous thing imaginable: to belong.